Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Live and Let Die.
Say live and let die.
Live and let die.
Live and let die.
Live and let die.
We are back to give you more, and I can't wait to kickstart this new era of Bond. Growing up as a kid, Moore was always my favourite, and though that changed as I aged, he still holds a special place in my heart. Moore was the actor who really got me to fall in love with the character, and I must have watched his movies like the most out of anyone. So come with me as we go through the film and break down the book alongside it. That's probably my least favourite entry in the series, but I'm here to live and get likes, so if you enjoyed, please hit the thumbs up. With that out of the way though, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Live and Let Die.
You got to give me all I've ever had.
Okay, so Live and Let Die was announced as being the next Bond film at the end of Diamonds Are Forever. American Tom Mankiewicz was brought onto that movie to add an American flair to the picture. Though Richard Maybaum did major parts of the script, Mankiewicz made the Yanks who watched it feel like it had a true American authenticity. Yeehaw! It was during that film that he noticed blaxploitation movies were making major waves. The Shaft films dropped the same year as Diamonds, and the Black Panthers were making headlines. Guy Hamilton was then picked to direct because he loved jazz music, and both his previous Bond films had been big successes. The book also contains many instances of voodoo, which the creative team wanted to bring to the film. However, upon scouting Haiti, the country was met with political unrest. Thus, they decided to shift to Jamaica to take Bond back to his roots in Dr. No. Dr. No is something I'll talk about a lot in this breakdown, so make sure you watch for the next 90 minutes, yay! This is the only Bond movie in the franchise though that has supernatural elements, and even the ending makes you question the occult. Baron Samedi dies several times and yet somehow keeps coming back. I remember playing the bonus level on GoldenEye and loving that they kept resurrecting the baddie. It just had me fascinated with this film, and I kinda wish that Bond movies would do the odd supernatural movie like this once in a while and have a villain who seems like they're more than just a man. But yeah, I'll take the mystique around Samedi if that's all we ever get. Now when it came to casting, Mankiewicz originally wanted a black woman to play Solitaire, with them initially considering Diana Ross. However, in the end they decided to stick to Fleming's text and cast Jane Seymour, who was just 20 in the movie. Rosie Carver was then switched to a black character, with Gloria Henry receiving the role. Along with Yaphet Kotto, the pair were brought in from across 110th Street, and I'm sure most of you guys recognize him from Alien.
Whisper, 2 more glasses for our guests.
Now when it came to casting, the producers were in a bit of a pickle. A bit of a pickle, I say. Broccoli and Saltzman had begged Connery to return and even offered him $5.5 million. This was an insane amount at the time, especially considering they'd rejected his request of $1 million just a couple films prior. But he'd said no and would never return to the role again.
No, I came back for the one, that was the understanding.
And would never return to the role again. Never again.
Never say never again.
United Artists were also trying to strong-arm Eon into casting an American. Burt Reynolds was actually approached by Broccoli, but he said Bond should be an English actor. Just don't tell him, yeah, that Connery's Scottish and Lazenby's Australian.
James Bond, 007.
They also considered Steve McQueen and Paul Newman and did a lot of screen tests. They were that desperate. They even approached Anthony Hopkins, but he said he didn't think he was right, which is just crazy to think how drastically that would have changed things. A nice martini, shaken not stirred. Michael Billington ended up becoming the frontrunner, but as we see with a lot of Bond casting announcements, things don't quite work out like that. Billington was still kept in place in case the next actor dropped out after one film, and he even appeared briefly in The Spy Who Loved Me. In the end, Broccoli went back to someone he'd considered twice before, and that was Roger Moore. Roger Moore had been thought of during the casting of Dr. No and on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The Saint had always got in the way though, but now things were clear. Connery gave him his blessing and said that Moore would be the perfect Bond. Safe to say that the pair shared a mutual respect, and even in the Battle of the Bonds, both refuse to put down the other. Entering the role at the age of 45, that makes him 4 years older than when Connery played the character in Diamonds Are Forever. But you really can't tell, and he brings some fresh blood to the role. Now, there was of course the worry that he'd get compared to Connery. Whereas with Lazenby, they were desperately trying to tell you it was the same character, they altered things with more. They made it so he never ordered a vodka martini and instead drinks bourbon.
Bourbon and water, please. Tell him, Deke, would you? Huh? No ice.
That's extra, man.
Bourbon, no ice, please.
2 Sazeracs. Where's your sense of adventure, James?
We also see Bond's home more, with the briefing being there instead of the office.
Insomnia, sir?
Instructions.
Though it had featured in Dr. No, this did change things up. Even little things like having him not wear a hat in the gun barrel and smoke cigars instead of cigarettes, that was all done to differentiate the two. Now that takes us to the gun barrel, which kickstarts the movie. Filmed in a ratio of 1.661, this gives it a full screen treatment. It's something director Guy Hamilton shot with on Goldfinger, which was the last film that used that aspect ratio in the Bond franchise. Calvin Dyson pointed out in his review how this makes it feel a bit TV-like, and overall, I completely agree. I think it was just Hamilton's style though, and he did film in letterbox in Diamonds Are Forever. The music is a lot more stylistically linked to the 70s though, and I can imagine it felt like Bond was stepping into a new era. It's here that we're then met with Moore playing James Bond for the second time. Yes, that's right, the second time. That's because in 1964, he actually appeared on a sketch show called Mainly Millicent.
That's quite a nice little casino you've got there. A nice secluded corner.
Over there, Mr. Bond.
Now, I want you guys to take a good look at him for the gun barrel, as he won't return until after the title sequence. This is a completely Bondless Bond movie opening, which is a very rare occurrence. The only other one that springs to mind is from Russia with Love, which technically was someone in a Bond disguise.
I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling pitch and your dumb dog.
But that kind of at least contains him in some form. These days, you kind of just expect him to be there, and I can imagine it going down as well as a James Bond poster where they photoshopped his gun away. Originally though, Tom Mankiewicz penned a scene in which Bond would have met a contact in a garden at night. He'd hand over a special pair of contact lenses, which is when some baddies arrived. Bond then would try and help the man escape, but when he climbed over a hedge, we'd pull out to reveal he was on a skyscraper, and he'd then fall to his death. Uh-oh, spaghetti-o. Michael Sheard was cast as that character, but they ended up removing the scene from the script. However, this opening does set the stakes for the rest of the story. We're taken to the United Nations building in New York and watch a British ambassador murdered in plain sight. It's later revealed that he's actually a British agent, along with the other pair we see often in the opening. This is under the orders of none other than Dr. Kananga, who we then meet in this intro, along with the lovely Solitaire. Kananga is a dictator of the fictional Caribbean island of San Monique, and he's orchestrating several hits on those who may be watching him. This is also the first Bond film to feature events on a fictional country, with the second appearing in License to Kill. Kananga was based on a real-life figure though, with that being Dr. Francois Duvalier, who was the dictator of Haiti. He used voodoo and claimed he was Baron Samedi in order to keep his followers in line, which is something that the villain does in the book. One of his men then blasts the ambassador's eardrums to death, and we watch him collapse in front of everyone. Alright guys, yeah, don't everyone rush to help him out, dear me. We then travel across to New Orleans in Louisiana. Here we catch an agent watching the restaurant Fillet of Soul, which we learn's one of Kananga's many fronts. And what's one of our many similarities to Dr. No, we see he's also killed in plain sight.
Whose funeral is it?
Yours.
I got stabbed. Not right now. I got stabbed. Son of a fucking...
I definitely feel like this whole aesthetic kind of builds off the opening of Dr. No, and now we watch this Strangways was murdered by the extremely theatrical Three Blind Mice. But I tell you mate, them guys, they've got nothing on this bunch. We see two of their hits in the movie, and every time an agent shows up outside the restaurant, they've got to get the Olympia brass band in, a coffin for it, arrange about 100 people to show up in their Sunday best, and then got to get the crying lady to turn on the waterworks, make sure the trumpets are in tune, walk slowly for about half a mile, pay everyone, then walk to the cemetery dancing the whole way. It's a lot of work, mate. Them Three Blind Mice would just show up, ask for change, and then shoot you when your back was turned. But these guys, they're professionals, they're going that extra mile. I love how after the hit's carried out, the tempo then changes and we get a more upbeat procession. The creative team looked at these kinds of funerals and loved how they turned it into a celebration of life. And yeah, it's just a great thing to incorporate into the movie. We then travel to our final assassination, which is at the San Monique graveyard. What I love about these three scenes is that they basically outline the three main locations in the movie. Bond first stops off at New York before then going to Louisiana. The showdown then goes down here, so it's a great way of telling the audience how the story is going to go. It also highlights how thematically we have moved towards the occult and supernatural as we see this ritualistic sacrifice taking place. This is done with a green and yellow snake, which gets a little nod later when Bond's at the occult shop. Here he picks up a cuddly toy snake, which also just so happens to be green and yellow, and it looks about as real as this one does as well. After the guy gets bit on the neck, we're then taken to the title sequence in what's one of the franchise's best songs. So Bond has gone from slacking off the Beatles and Goldfinger to now having one of their frontmen sing his tunes. Over the years, I've kind of gone back and forth on the song, with it being one that I'd normally skip from the collection. However, when I had kids and got my Aston Martin, I took them in it and blasted this track out at full volume. They stand about and dance on the seat and jump up and down as the tempo changed, which, yeah, they absolutely love the song. I have to clarify as well, I am parked on the driveway during this with the handbrake fully on and the engine turned off. But yeah, since then, I've really grown to love it. And that initial dislike was also held by the producers as well. According to IMDb Trivia, when Guy Hamilton heard the song, he said it was good for a demo, but then wanted to hear the real record. And yet, awkward. Harry Saltzman liked it, but ideally he wanted it to be sung by a black artist. McCartney said that he'd only let them use the song if he and his band were the ones playing it. Saltzman had previously turned down McCartney's offer to produce A Hard Day's Night, and he felt bad saying no again. So in the end he agreed, but stated he always preferred Brenda Aranis' version, which we do hear in the movie.
Live and let die.
Ever known for their amazing opinions on journalism, the Rolling Stones magazine also said that McCartney had sold out by providing a song for the movie. However, with all this, it didn't hold back the record, and it became the second Bond song nominated for an Oscar. The first was The Look of Love from Casino Royale, but this was the first track as part of Ian Productions. So, quite a big accolade. It was also the first time a rock song featured as the title track, and it reached the #1 spot in the UK charts. For the rest of the score, Paul brought across Sir George Martin, who was often referred to as the fifth Beatle. He produced and collaborated with the band on a lot of their best work, and though I'd have loved John Barry back, I think the soundtrack's fantastic. The song was also later covered by Guns N' Roses and also The Pretenders. They sang 2 songs on the soundtrack for The Living Daylights, and it is nice that they kept close to the Bond songs. I think the title sequence is extremely strong as well, with it being Maurice Binder's best work up until this point. The compositing and execution of the on-screen graphics works so well, and I love the cut between the skulls, fire and dances. Overall, it's a great way to kickstart the movie, and it really makes you sit up in your seat. Now, the book opens with the chapter The Red Carpet. This features Bond arriving in New York, and it talks about the luxuries in the life of an agent. When they're guests in other countries, they often get treated like royalty, but Bond still feels a bit in danger. He feels like a man whose fate's in the hands of others and expects to be in customs for over an hour.
Hey, easy, Charlie. Let's get there in one piece.
After that, they roll out the red carpet, hence the name of the chapter. Very Captain Obvious there, very obvious, but that's why they call it that. Given the VIP treatment, he then goes on a ride through New York City. Calling Manhattan the fattest atomic bomb target on Earth, the text really speaks to the Cold War tensions. It's here that he then has a chance encounter with Mr. Big. Noticing a figure in the back of a chauffeur-driven car who's staring intently at him, he later realizes that that's in fact the villain.
Quite revealing.
It's not too long after that he gets a nice surprise in the form of Felix Leiter, whom Bond thought was currently in Paris. Felix is a major part of the book, and he's someone who suffers a really tragic fate. However, for this opening, it feels like the boys are back together, and he acts as a great guide for this fish out of water story. It's a good lie. Upon meeting with the CIA, Bond's also given $1,000 in seized communist money. He's encouraged to spend it, which will basically help put it back into the American economy without having to go through all the legal litigations of like, we seized this from the Soviets. So nice one, Bond. Hashtag Bond spending spree. Now, they then sit down and Bond discusses how he got here, which takes us to 2 weeks prior. Bond is in his Drury flat in Chelsea, and it's from here that he has his meeting with M. Now that's kinda where we start the movie out, with Bond lying in bed with an Italian agent. It's a far cry from the stylistic and smooth introductions of the first two actors, and yet, out of all of the Bonds ever, this is the most low-key introduction that we've ever had. However, I do feel like that's for a reason. This kind of treats it like Moore as Bond is no big deal, and yet, kinda like he's always been there. Because of that, I actually think it's quite a smart way to do it, even though it doesn't really give him a big bombastic introduction. But yeah, they tried that with Lazenby and it didn't really work at the time, so I think they just wanted it to feel like we're just picking up with another Bond adventure. Being at his home instead of the office also allows them to differentiate him from Connery, while showing off his fancy JB pajamas. Seeing his house has had an update since Dr. No, he's got a lovely coffee machine as well. It's very 70s chic, and this comes along with Bond's digital watch. This is a Hamilton Pulsar P2 2900 LED digital watch. JamesBondLifestyle.com have done a full breakdown of the watch itself, and this is the first digital watch in the world, which is Bond doing big moves. This then gets replaced in the same scene when Bond gets his upgraded Rolex. Packing a magnet and buzz or bezel, this comes in handy later on. The triangles to denote the hours also turn red when it's activated, which Craig's watch inspector also did as well, which I also just happened to have on here. Bond also uses the magnet to undress Madeline Smith's Miss Caruso. Smith worked with Moore on The Persuaders, and he recommended her personally for the scene. And yet, the magnet topping it off is quite a fun way to end the scene. They did this effect by attaching an imperceptible wire to the zip, and then had a stagehand sitting under the pair, and then pulling it down while Moore waved the watch about. Now the scene really begins with them arriving and rattling off that 3 agents have been killed and Bond has to go and investigate. So very Dr. No again. What I love about this scene though is that Bond basically has to play hide the Italian agent, and he ends up getting a little help from Moneypenny. Moore and Lois Maxwell were friends in real life, and I do think that this kind of influenced their relationship. Whereas Bond and Moneypenny had been flirty in the past, this feels more toned down. The YouTube channel Rank described it in their review as her being like Bond's big sister, which I think's the perfect description. If you watched our breakdown of Diamonds Forever as well, then you know she was almost kicked from the cast because she was asking for a pay rise. For Live and Let Die, she returned for the same fee as that, but they ended up shooting for an extra 2 days. So Maxwell was paid more than what she would have got if they just paid her what she asked for in the first place instead of doing the cheap day rate. Don't cheap out on them. Moore revealed that Maxwell bought a fur coat, and this was to celebrate the extra pay. We also almost got a recast of M, and this was sadly due to the death of Bernard Lee's wife. That was Gladys Meridew, and Kenneth Moore was almost put in the role, but Lee ultimately decided to return. Who is missing though is Desmond Llewellyn's Q. At the time, he was working on a show called Follyfoot, and the producers there actually made room for him to go and shoot this scene. They wrote him out of 3 episodes, and everything was ready. However, Broccoli and Saltzman felt the movies were getting a bit too gadgety and decided not to include him, which Llewellyn was obviously annoyed about, especially because you watch the movie and it's got a shit ton of gadgets in it. This is the only film since Dr. No that Llewellyn's missed, and from this point onward he'd work until his death shortly after The World Is Not Enough. The scene as a whole also kind of plays off chapter 2 in the book, which is called Interview with M. Bond's very early on in his career and is actually excited to see him. It's here that we basically get our briefing scene, sort of like the one in Goldfinger, but here we learn about Mr. Big.
Is this the stupid mother that tailed you uptown?
Now in the book, Mr. Big's real name's told to us. That is Buonaparte Ignis Gallia. Bonaparte, or I'm trying to be posh.
Names is for tombstones, baby.
But there he's an agent of Smersh and the leader of the Black Widow voodoo cult. You have to remember, this is the sequel to Casino Royale, and that book ended with Vesper taking her own life. Bond then swore to get revenge on Smersh, and this is the first step on the path towards that. Big's been smuggling 17th century gold coins for the organization and has been with them since the Second World War. Born in Haiti, he became an exceptional soldier in the Allied forces. He then defected to Russia and became one of their special agents. Upon revisiting his home, he came across a cabaret act
namely a woman named Solitaire. Believing her to be psychic, this would help in his espionage missions. But Solitaire somewhat became his prisoner, and ultimately this led to his undoing. He was also thought to be the master of Baron Samedi, which makes his followers swear undying loyalty to him. In the movie, we do get to meet the Baron himself, but we'll talk about that character more in just a bit.
Now the movie changes things massively, with Big being an alter ego of Dr. Kananga. Baron Samedi is his own character, whereas in the book, Big uses him as a disguise. The coin smuggling's also changed to a drug plot, which ruffled some feathers at the time. Writer Richard Maybaum was open about his dislike and didn't think Bond should be involved in the drug trade. This was the first film he didn't contribute on the script for, and I do think it misses some of his style. The lines here for Bond are also purposely generic because, yeah, they didn't know who was gonna be cast in the role. So they kinda wrote your typical spy, whereas later films would be more suited to more. The name Kananga actually comes from the crocodile wrangler whose farm we visit later in the movie. The producers ended up visiting his Alligator Farm, which is where they saw the sign, "Trespassers will be eaten." Taken by this, they met Ross Kananga and ended up writing a scene around this location. Ross ended up doing the alligator run that we see later as well. Ross saw his dad eaten alive by alligators as a kid, and he was the only one willing to face down the creatures.
That was totally wicked!
They then named Kananga directly after him and added Doctor, potentially as another nod to Dr. No. Anyway, we end the scene with Bond getting back to the Italian agent and using his watch to zip down her dress. Out of all of Q's gadgets, Moore said this was his favourite, which I'm guessing is because of this scene.
Sheer magnetism, Barney.
Either way, Bond then lands in America and we get a journey from the airport that's stacked with paranoia, which again I feel is riffing off him landing in Jamaica and Dr. No. What I love here though is that Solitaire talks about his journey and she uses the tarot cards to warn of his coming. Tarot cards, to the best of my knowledge, are supposed to be interpreted, whereas these kind of spell out exactly what kind of man they're gonna clash with.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Solitaire would have known for definite though if she just looked at the back of the card, as we have the number 007, which is a detail I always appreciated. The producers apparently approached Salvador Dali to design this set, but he wanted too much money for the work. So instead they went to Fergus Hall, who was also known for his surrealist work. Dali ended up continuing work on the cards though, and he released them a couple years later. Always appreciated how this took the cards and kind of spun them out from just being associated with gambling. Since then, card tricks and so on have become greatly associated with James Bond, and I was lucky enough to meet a Bond fan at Cue the Music who said that they'd actually started doing magic tricks off the back of stuff like this. That is, Mr. Magician, who went around the whole event performing tricks like showing our editor Steve him spelling out James Bond from completely blank cards. And yeah, it was just great seeing how a small scene like this made someone get a lifelong love of the franchise. Seymour's also dubbed by Nikki Van der Zyl, who provided the voice for a lot of Bond girls before her. Anyway, it's on the road that we meet Mr. Whisper, who kills Bond's driver with a wing mirror rocket. Though Whisper does come from the book, the attempt on Bond's life is a lot more low-tech there. That takes us to chapter 3, which is titled A Visiting Card. Bond sees firsthand how Big runs things and the inner workings of his operations. After the end of Prohibition, he opened up a string of brothels and hired lieutenants, which he paid 50 grand a year to. He used to operate with a business partner, but he was found in a barrel of cement on the river. Becoming the sole owner, he then began to amass a fortune. War then broke out, but his ability to speak French and English aided him greatly. He worked with both armies until he became a double agent. One day he was tasked with assassinating a target, and he did it by pushing them onto train tracks. All the witnesses heard was a man screaming and then a figure disappearing into the crowd. He was questioned but sprung by the best lawyer in Harlem and has now operated in New York ever since. Using voodoo and superstition, he's gained a reputation for sacrificing goats, though the CIA does think that might be a code word for human. He also has people dancing to hypnotic songs and their eyes roll back when the beat stops, which puts them into a transfixed state. Their arms then stretch out like a zombie, which has led to the legend that he can control the dead. Returning to his room, Bond then receives a parcel which he can hear a ticking coming from. Instantly he goes into alert mode and dives over the bed. The alarm then goes off, but strangely it doesn't explode. Bond then lowers his guard, but then a blast goes off. He manages to survive, but debris and smoke are everywhere. This is more of a warning though than a sheer attempt on his life, and along with the clock they find a little message. This chillingly says that just like how the clock stopped, soon his heart will as well. Describing it as a visiting card, this gives the chapter title its name. In the movie, the car then crashes and we're introduced to a sort of familiar face.
Genuine Felix Leiter. Illuminating.
Now, here we meet Felix Leiter.
Hello, Felix.
Played here by David Hedison, this becomes really important later in the series. Now, in order to discuss this, I have to talk about the book. In that, when they're investigating the smuggling, they discover that they're moving the coins across in fish tanks. The organisation hide them in the soil, and nobody ever really looks there. However, Felix goes snooping, and this leads to a pretty grim fate. Felix is captured and fed to a shark. Doesn't happen in the movie, but Kananga does want to feed Bond and Solitaire to the sharks in the climax. Overall though, it is of course a plot point they save for later down the line. That movie is of course Licensed to Kill. There Felix is once more played by David Hedison, so it's a nice carryover from the book and movie, and I'm glad they kept the same actor. As for the story, it's thought Fleming was actually going to kill Felix at this point.
You what?
Bond finds him in a very mangled state with just a blood-stained sheet covering the agent. Along with him is a note that says he disagreed with something that ate him. This is what Bond finds in Licensed to Kill, and it's one of the most memorable parts in the source material. Fleming was apparently convinced by his publishers to keep him alive as they wanted to appeal to the American market. So from this point on in the books, Felix has a hook for a hand and also walks with a limp. If you pull up any of the comics with the character, then chances are that's what Felix is going to have. I love the way it all ties to this casting though, and it's such a great moment in the movie. Felix at one point even warns Bond to watch out for sharks.
Watch out for sharks on the way back.
I'll see you for breakfast, Felix.
Good hunting.
Now we see Kananga as the CIA are spying on him. Knowing he's being listened to, he plays a recording, which I always loved. Some clothes are also brought in, and he starts to undress, which is the first clue that he's secretly Mr. Big. Bond then heads to some of Kananga's fronts. This includes Occult, which then leads him to Kananga himself. Finding Whisper's car, he then calls for a cab, which is driven by one of Big's men. The shopkeeper radios ahead, and we see as the entire way people radio where he is.
He's heading east.
Now, one of the big controversies around the movie is that all of the villains are black. Yafe Kodo has been pretty open about how Mr. Big was a stereotype, and he wanted to add more complexity to the character. This reputation, unfortunately, is made worse by the book, which has the N-word on about every single page. I'm not even kidding now, I was listening to the audiobook and being like, fucking hell mate, sounds a bit like an NWA record at points this. But it's written by a white guy. I think if you take the N-word out, it's probably about 50 pages long. Now, you'll often hear about books getting updated for modern audiences and how words are sometimes changed to fit newer sensibilities. There's always that argument there that they shouldn't really do it, and when it comes to the Fleming publications, this book is often at the heart of what's been altered the most. In newer editions, everything's been toned down, which is, obviously done to avoid controversy. In turn though, this has garnered its own controversy, but personally, I can see why the Fleming estate did what they did. I can imagine them just sitting in a boardroom and someone potentially arguing that they shouldn't update the books. Now on the flip side of this, I can then imagine someone arguing back saying, do we really want the hero of the book being a white guy that says the N-word all the time and goes around killing black people? And yeah, optics wise, I can totally see why they were like, just best to find it and replace it completely. I am actually someone who is often like, don't update it, keep it the same. But in the case of this, I can understand why they want that the way it is. And stuff like Folio Society, they've made a point of just to print the original versions as how they were. So the texts are there if you want them. But if you buy the newer versions from the Fleming estate, then yeah, it's going to be the updated ones. Now, Tom Mankiewicz has said the optics didn't really cross his mind that much, and that the black characters lost because they were the bad guys. Not because they were black. They lost because they were the bad guys in a Bond movie. He said in a Bond movie, you know that the baddies are going to lose anyway, and that Bond's going to win, and that happens whether they're black, white, or Asian. Which I think is a totally fair point. Jane Seymour was even asked about this controversy though, and this is what she said on the subject.
Ian Fleming wrote them. I mean, what are you going to do?
I
mean,
know.
that was what he wrote, and that's what it was, you know. And it was a black exploitation or something, or whatever was going on at the time. I mean, you know, it was a different era. I mean, there've been different eras for different things. We can't, you know, you just won't make that movie now.
Right.
But people still love it.
I think every Bond reader kind of knows the work as a reflection of the time and Fleming during the times that he lived in. I actually think J.W. Pepper is probably the biggest controversy in the film, and yeah, we'll talk about him more in just a bit. I think a big issue with the movie when discussing it as well is that the marketing clearly didn't really value their black actors. Yaphet Kotto stated he was held back from doing marketing because the producers were worried about the public's reaction. All of Rosie Carver's love scenes were cut in South Africa, and this was due to apartheid, and this, looking back, it's really sad that people couldn't get past including big characters because of the colour of their skin. And yeah, it's stuff that still occasionally peppers the movie industry today. Thankfully, we're a lot better, but looking back, yeah, it is a big controversy around the movie. Either way, it of course opens up lots of different talking points around the movie, and yeah, by no means do I feel like I have much authority to speak on the subject, so I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Actually, really like the networking characters though, and having them all work together just basically shows that they're a big organization that's really well run. We learn about these more in chapter 4, which is called the Big Switchbird, and discover he has people called the Eyes. These watch over everything, including Bond, and in the book we follow as he goes up Fifth Avenue and meets some of the CIA operatives. Now they say Big's operation's completely clean, and that their policy with him is live and let live. However, Bond replies that in his experience, the best policy is live and let die.
He said it! He said it!
Chapter 5 is fittingly Fifth Avenue, and it's kind of Bond's journey through Manhattan. It's Fleming's classic travelogue, and back when the book was released, you know, New York was kind of this mythical place to us Brits. So I can imagine reading this story was really engrossing. It's clear Fleming respects a lot of black arts as well, as he talks about music and expression. The characters discuss how much they enjoyed seeing a black Macbeth once, and we also see posters of Sugar Ray Robinson. Felix remarks how wise he was and how he quit while he was ahead and invested in property. This makes Bond wonder what he'd be doing if he got out now, and it nicely plays off the danger he's about to wade into. They're followed by people constantly getting on the bus behind them and relaying their description back and forth on the switchboard. But Felix and Bond never really notice. They then travel to several spots paid for by Bond using all the communist money. Bond then remarks that there's a feeling in the air that, though they're not technically trespassing, they're also not really wanted there. In the movie, Bond then goes into the Fillet of Soul and orders a booth which plays off moments from the novel. There the waiter's really friendly, and he even points out various celebrities. His demeanour then completely changes when Felix asks about Big, and he ends up pretending not to hear him. They then go to a place called the Boneyard and are shown to table Z. This is one of Big's trap tables, which is what we also see in the movie.
I'd like something on the side as well. Information. 3 men and a girl came in.
A bit in the novel I love though is that this happens during a performance like the one we see later. The strobe lights flicker back and forth and then cut completely to black. It's so dark, Bond doesn't even realise he's been dropped down, and then the lights come on and he realises he's in a completely different room. Down in the basement, Bond meets Teehee, who's one of my favourites in the franchise.
Funny how the least little thing amuses him.
In the book, he giggles quite a lot, and he's pretty much like one of Scar's hyenas, I'd say. Does that make sense? Scar's hyena henchman. Basically, he's just constantly going tee like bloody Michael Jackson, that lad. For the movie though, they give him a hook and a metal arm, which gives him a vice grip. It is believed that this inspired Dr. Claw from Mr. Gadget, but it has to be said, that's never been completely confirmed. We later learn that he lost it when feeding his pet alligator, and the Kananga farm belongs to him. We were going to get a deleted scene when Teehee felled Kananga, where he threatened to feed his other arm to the lizards. Speaking of Kananga, he then makes his debut in his Mr. Big persona. Ordering Bond to be killed, the agent finally pulls a card that shows the lovers, which rightly shocks Solitaire, but kind of predicts their future, whether it was intentional or not. Bond's in a escort outside, but I just love how cool he is even in the face of death.
Now, I promise you'll stay right there. I shan't be long.
Moore's Bond really needed to be different to Connery and yet still feel true to the character, which I think lines like this encapsulate. Let out at gunpoint, he then uses his quick wits to escape. Saved by a new ally in Strutter, he works for the CIA. Strutter's been following him and radioing as well, and I think it works as a great way to show not every person of colour in the movie is under Kananga's control. Bond then heads to Jamaica, where we come face to face with the Baron. I love how he's kind of introduced with entertainment and parlour tricks, which you could write some of this stuff off as. His costume's amazing, and he's such a great character that adds a real theatrical side to the movie. Jeffrey Holder is just fabulous in the role, and I remember him stealing the show during Annie. Our mates over at Mooch TV reminded me of that the other day, and definitely go check them out for some movie reactions. Checking in at the hotel, Bond then scans his room looking for surveillance devices. Again, it's very Dr. No, and a high-tech version of Bond having to manually look for items there. Whisper then arrives to tip it's another of Big's fronts, and an attempt on Bond's life's made. Like Dr. No! Whereas that movie had the tarantula attack, here we get a snake slid into Bond's bath. This had to be filmed in a freezing cold room in London, as apparently having a hot one would mean it was energized and would have moved across the floor way too fast to film. Bond then creates a makeshift flamethrower with him busting out the aerosol on his cigar, which I'm sure everyone watching this video has done variations of when they were younger. It's here that we then meet Rosie, who pops the gun through the door first, like Professor Dent in Dr. No. It's Dr. No, they do lots of stuff that references Dr. No. One thing you might notice as well is that this is actually a man who gets flipped onto the bed. Gloria Henry said in an interview that this was a white man that they put in makeup because they didn't have a stunt woman or a stunt man with her complexion on set. She highlighted how the industry was such a closed book back then, and how it's insane you'd hire a white man to play a black woman's stunt double. And yeah, it just added to more of the controversy around the movie. As a character as well, I know people find Rosie a bit annoying, and this is due to her being far more superstitious and kind of screaming every single scene that she's in.
Oh, a snake. I forgot. I should have told you. You should never go in there without a mongoose.
Bond then has breakfast and gets a warning in the form of the Queen of Cups card. Normally this means a kind of nurturing person, but when the card's upside down, it means a deceitful and duplicitous liar. So it's a clue about Rosie. Bond learns this from the tarot card shop before then heading to the harbour.
Yeah, he's got this stupid little dog, hasn't he? Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, he doesn't think he's James Bond. He thinks he's in like a video store or something. The whole gimmick's stupid, yeah. I hate that stuff anyway. I'll see you later, mate. Take care, man. Take care. Just talking about someone I absolutely hate there. Now, at this point, we meet Quarrel Jr. In the book, it's just your regular Quarrel, like when your mate says, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the best one ever. Now, but why this is because in the book continuity, Dr. No happens after this, with that being the 6th book in the series. However, that was the first film released, and with his dad dying in that, they just made the character his son. Strangways was also introduced in this book as well, and he's the character who got killed in Dr. No, so there's lots of connections back and forth. In a further nod to that movie, they actually considered bringing back Honey Rider. Eventually, they changed their minds, which I think was probably the right call.
Now, they kind of repeat the misdirect with Strutter again with Quarrel Jr. I love the way that he's tying the rope up behind Bond, and yeah, first look, it seems a bit suspicious. Having Rosie try and save Bond also helps to cover she's one of Kananga's forces.
I'm playing both sides so that I always come out on top.
This is something they go through in the next scene, with Bond and Rosie exploring where one of the agents were killed. As we know, the cards tipped him off in advance, and it turns out it was sent by Solitaire, who's desperate to escape her life with Kananga. In the book, she calls Bond and he tells her to note down where to meet her. She has to scramble around for a pen and paper, which he thinks shows she's legit, as if she was wanting to trap him, then she'd have one at the ready. We then cut to her reading the cards, and she's clearly under Kananga's control. Left with little option, Kananga decides to use Rosie to kill Bond. Now, Bond is aware of this ahead of time, and thus he does the sensible thing in the situation, and decides to shag her before going to an interrogation by gunpoint.
But you couldn't. You wouldn't. Not after what we just done.
The image of him with a gun is always burned into my brain, and this is because of the absolutely terrible DVD cover where they had more absolutely airbrushed to shit. I mean, look at this. What the fuck is this?
Brother,
What's that?
Who let your nana use FaceApp? Rosie then notices the scarecrow and sprints into the trees, which is when she's gunned down. No idea why they didn't use this to shoot Bond, as they were about before, but the book has a big section about the fear that Rosie experienced in her final moments.
It used to be a convincing act, Rosie. It's wearing a little thin now.
Solitaire tells Bond that people are so frightened by the idea of Baron Samedi that Big can use this to get even the most mundane to work for him, much like zombies. A chicken feather with blood on it or a bag of bones can strike fear into people with certain beliefs, which we see in Rosie's reactions.
It's just a hat, darling, belonging to a small-headed man of limited means who lost a fight with a chicken.
It's a warning. Get it out of here!
Book Bond clearly thinks it's a bunch of bullshit, and we can't see cameras within the scarecrows. So clearly technology is behind the theatrics, which I've always thought is such a cool section of the story. Cutting to Solitaire rocking her best Queen Amidala cosplay, we see she's berated by Kananga. He's such an interesting villain because he's clearly the wizard behind the curtain and knows it's not real. However, he puts a lot of stock in Solitaire and gives her the benefit of the doubt. He even mentions her mother working for him before.
She had the power and lost it. It became useless to me. You will not make the same mistake.
Yaphet Kotto was 33 at the time of filming, and because of this, people have thought that the character was originally conceived as being a lot older, unless her mother helped him when she was a child. But yeah, due to the power going with her virginity, she'd at least have to have lost it when Solitaire was born.
If and when the time comes, I decide you are to lose it, I myself will take it away.
But yeah, Big just has this controlling grip and is even controlling how and who she loves. I think this is the final straw for her, whereas in the book she's been wanting to escape for a while. Segueing to Bond hand gliding, we see him casually smoking a cigar as he drifts through the air. And yet moments like this make me wish they'd bring back smoking in the Bond movies. Don't even smoke myself, mate, just looks gangster. Noticing a guy watching the boat, he then gives the god that red shirt treatment. Upon landing, he then rips off his pants and reverses his jacket to reveal it's part of a lovely two-piece suit. I think this moment is so cool, especially with the Bond theme subtly playing in the background. It's of course a nod at the opening of Goldfinger, and I kind of wish they did these sort of quick costume changes more often in the movies. If you'd like to dress like Bond as well, then why not check out our partners at Anthony Sinclair. I was lucky enough to meet Elliot at Cue the Music, and we shot an interview going over the fantastic collection as part of their 6 decades of Bond stuff. I will be posting that on an upcoming breakdown, but Elliot and his dad are absolutely fantastic tailors, and they'll make you any suit from the films that fits you perfectly. They've also just launched their Thunderball Celebration camp collar shirts along with the sunbathing shorts. I've been told they're getting the Cool Ray glasses back in stock very soon from that movie, so if you missed out on these absolutely amazing sunglasses, then also keep an eye out. The link to them is in the description and pinned comment, and even if you just want to go and follow them on Instagram or something and check out what they're doing, I'm sure they'll help you dress better, because yep, they definitely help me. I'm currently rocking the Matera suit from No Time to Die, and yeah, I look fantastic if I do say so myself. Anyway, going inside, Bond plays pick a card with Solitaire and she ends up choosing the lovers. Bond basically tricks his way into bed though because all of the cards were the lovers.
You knew the answer before it was given. Strangely enough, somehow. So did I.
I rigged it.
Suppose if we're putting on our film analysis hat for this one, then it's a bit like how Big uses belief to trick people into working for him. Yes, that's what it's like if we look at it on an analytical level, yes. This could be read really badly by some people though, especially as the next shot we see the pair are lying in bed and she looks absolutely devastated, and he's more than double her age. But I think Moore manages to pull it off.
Has to be a first time for everyone.
Yeah, definitely manages to pull it off. This act of seduction though will mean she's got no more sway with Kananga and she'll have a death sentence due to sleeping with the enemy. She's clearly distraught, but Bond basically is just sat there rolling his eyes as she rattles off about her powers being vanquished. However, his ears perk up when she asks for another round because it's kind of like in for a penny, in for a pound.
It's the time before we leave. For lesson number 3.
Absolutely.
You can only lose your virginity once. Bond and Solitaire then find the poppy fields due to following where the scarecrows are most present. Coming across Baron Samedi playing a pipe, this is revealed to be a radio. The prop was later used in Doctor Who, and it's such a cool moment. Bond and Solitaire then carry on and they find the field which Kananga uses to subsidize heroin. Subsidize, is that the right word? Either way, Kananga's using voodoo to keep people away from the area, and he snuffed out the agent after they got too close. Now the plan is to give it away for free, which will run his competition out of business, and Kananga will then get a monopoly on the drug trade. He will then start a charge, and with millions of addicts across America, he'll amass a fortune while destabilizing the country. So it's quite genius, and it's a plot I've seen lots of other films and shows adopt since. Now I do think, you know, the Bond movies had been getting a bit ridiculous, especially with stuff like lasers in space, so it's nice to just tone it down and take it to a guy who just wants money. In the book, we then get a fantastic moment where he describes what he views his work like. He says his genius will never be appreciated and compares it to the artists who painted masterpieces in the tombs of pharaohs, knowing full well no one would ever see their work, which is a description I love. Bond and Solitaire are then spotted, and the pair make a break for it in a double-decker bus. This is one of the big set pieces of the movie, with the top floor coming off halfway through. This moment lives rent-free in my head, and every time I'm upstairs on a bus like this, I always imagine getting smashed off because the drivers piled into a bridge or something. This was done by mounting the upper half on rollers so it would remain in place and then slide off once it hit the bridge. Moore actually took a course on bus driving for the shots involving him, and Maurice Patchett performed the stunt work. He was a bus driving instructor in London and had an insane amount of experience behind the wheel. From doing my research, I found that double-decker bus drivers apparently have to learn how to balance the buses in all sorts of conditions. This includes swerving on wet ground and still keeping the vehicle upright, which is a stunt that we see in the movie. Landing at the airport, Bond then recognizes the taxi driver as being the one from New York.
Well, hello, Jim. What's happening, baby?
Taken to the airport, Solitaire then feigns being a hostage so she can play dumb to Kananga. She also gives Bond the chance to escape, which comes in very handy.
My only regret is I won't be there to see it.
This then leads us into a chase at an airstrip with Bond hijacking Mrs. Bell's flying lesson. Bell was named that as a nod to Bell Helicopters, who provided theirs for a lot of the movies. It leads to another chase, and I think one of my big issues with the movie is there's just chase after chase after chase after chase. I definitely think you could have cut one out and it would have helped a lot with the pacing. They even kind of repeat bits from the bus scene with the wings being chopped off the plane. Having just seen a bus cut in half, it's kind of them just doing the same trick. It's a far cry from what they do in the novel, where Bond and Solitaire make a mad dash from the gang separately. Bell's here purely just to add some comedic relief, and some shocked faces and disapproving looks.
Same time tomorrow, Mrs. Bell?
Now at this point in the book, Bond heads to the train station to meet with Solitaire. The story tells us more about the surveillance network, big setup throughout the city, and the guerrilla spies he has amongst his ranks. They're known as the Eyes. It says how Bond is spotted by a man with a wicker basket and he goes to make a call. Within 15 minutes, a member of staff on the train's called in sick and being replaced by one of Big's men. Keeping an eye on Bond and Solitaire, they're travelling under the name Mr. and Mrs. Bryce. However, Big had no idea that Solitaire was planning on leaving him, and she's overheard a lot of his plans. Though she knows she's risking her life, it's a life she's wanted for a long time. Finally taking it, she's got a new lease on life. Travelling on the train reminds Bond of his time in the war, as there's swamplands and miles of fields. Gives us an insight into Bond's past, and he orders an old-fashioned and also some chicken sandwiches. It's here that we also learn about Solitaire's history. He sensed a lonely childhood on some great decaying plantation, an echoing great house slowly falling into disrepair and being encroached on by the luxuriance of the tropics, the parents dying and the property being sold, the companionship of a servant or two, and an equivocal life in lodgings in the capital. The beauty which was her only asset in the struggle against the shady propositions to be a governess, a companion, a secretary, all of which meant respectable prostitution. Then the dubious unknown steps into the world of entertainment. The evening stint at the nightclub with a mysterious act which, among people dominated by magic, must have kept many away from her and made her a person to be feared. And then, one evening, the huge man with a grey face sitting at a table by himself. The promise that he would put her on Broadway. The chance of a new life, of an escape from the heat and the dirt and the solitude.
Now it's here that we learn Solitaire's real name, Simone Luttrell. She's just 25 and has clearly lived a life where she's been used by others to further their own ends. The conductor then warns them they have an enemy on the train and tells them to watch out. He says he doesn't like trouble and gives them window wedges to put under the door. The conductor states they should ring for food and not let anyone in, and Bond gives him $20. He then offers him an extra 10 to quickly lower the ramp when they get to the station so the pair can make a break for it. We then get one of those food and drink chapters that Fleming was famous for. Bond gets wasted and basically orders 4 martinis after the first 2 arrive, and he says they're not strong enough. The train is pretty uneventful in the book, with it being a lot of sort of proto From Russia with Love. They of course skip over the train at the midsection of the movie, but towards the climax, well, at the like one of the last scenes, it is the last scene, they give us a pretty big action scene on one. Now we then see Strutter observing the fillet of soul in Louisiana. This gives us the return of the most over-the-top, well-organised hitman group you've ever seen, and Strutter's taken out just before Bond and Felix arrive. Which I love, because they kind of show up wondering where he's got to, and the parade just continues on right in front of them. It's just so elaborate, no one would ever suspect all this was put together just to murder one guy. Spared no expense.
Hell of a send-off.
Going to the restaurant, Bond refuses to take the booth, and instead they have their table near the stage. Felix then gets told he's got a call from Strutter, and Bond's left at the table.
Telephone call for you, guy called Strutter.
Thanks. For a minute there, I thought Harry was laying down on the job.
I can just imagine Felix like finding out he was dead a couple days later and realizing he's done like 50 puns about him being dead just after it happened. But it gives him an absence. This is different in the book, as Felix and Bond are both lowered together. Felix is then taken off to a room, and Bond gets escorted to Big. We then learn that Felix was held there for a bit by Big's men, and they didn't get their orders through for quite a while. So Felix just started chatting away, and when they got onto the subject of jazz, Big's men just basically took a liking to him. They talked about that for hours, and then the orders came through to waste him, but they basically just took him for a drive and dropped him off at the hospital. They said to Leek that he'd been left half dead, but they kind of felt bad for ruining his night, which always kind of cracked me up, because Bond's time doesn't go as well as that, and he's taken to Big, which is pretty much a scene that we get in the movie. In it, Kananga tests Solitaire, all the while Bond's fingers held hostage. The book has Big explaining her virginity and that she'll have nothing to do with men, which is why she was known as Solitaire in Haiti. Now, though she fails in the movie, Kananga plays it up like she's passed, and thus Bond's pinky spared. However, the book takes a darker turn. Teehee doesn't have his claw there, but he bends back Bond's finger until it snaps, which is described in all its agonizing detail. Teehee shows off his name, and he gives a giggle before brutally snapping it. In an act of defiance, Bond then utters, "Those who deserve to die, die the death they deserve," which he even instructs them to write down because it's such a good quote. In the book, Teehee then escorts Bond out, with Big basically giving him a warning. He's then taken through the compound, which is when he kinda becomes a bit of a dick mate. Bond ends up kicking Teehee down the stairs, which kills him, and I've always been like, whoa, bit much that, mate. They gave you a warning and they were leading you out. They treated Felix like royalty. This happens really early on in the book as well, so it's not even like things have been escalating. Bond then makes his way to the garage and shoots some of Big's men before stealing a car. And it's like, mate, they were chill. You just kicked one down the stairs, killed them, shot some others, and stole their car. They dropped Felix off. Just talk about jazz and they'll let you go. In the movie, the interrogation scene's a lot more dramatic, with Big demanding whether Bond touched Solitaire. And I always love the way Bond plays it.
That's between Solitaire, myself, and Kananga. I'll tell him when I see him.
Bond stays firm in that he'll only speak to Kananga, which is when Big reveals they're one and the same.
Quite revealing.
Now, I'm pretty old, and I can't really remember a time before I knew the twist, so it's difficult for me to kind of guess what the impact would have been like. If you remember it and being shocked, then let me know, but yeah, for me, it wasn't fooling anyone. He's even got the same people working for him. These days, you know, Easter eggers like me, is that the official job? Easter eggers. We would have like picked apart the trailer and figured out they were one and the same like months before the release. And yeah, obviously if you looked at the cast list online, you'd be like, why is no one playing Mr. Big? So yeah, I am really interested to hear if the twist was worked out before the release. Bond then says,
Butterhook,
which was apparently improvised by Moore. Solitaire then fails, but Kananga's luckily feeling generous and thus he lets Bond go, finger intact, and he's then taken to an absolutely fantastic set piece. Meanwhile, Kananga basically tells Solitaire it's over for her. The Baron arrives, and I've always loved how he's clearly able to read the cards as well, and even sort of a devil on Kananga's shoulder.
There's only one proper way to deal with this. And one proper time.
We then journey to the Alligator Farm, which is where we get the scene that first springs to mind for me when I think about the movie. Escorted through the lab, we see as it acts as another front before Bond's taken to a bridge. Apparently the production team got really stressed out because the animals kept climbing up onto the bridge and trying to eat them, which you can understand you'd be stressed out about. Bond's then dropped into the center of the feeding pen, which is when he has to use his wits to escape. I absolutely love the tension here with him trying lots of different ways to get out. That includes him pulling a boat and using his magnet watch, which seems like it's gonna work, but then it fails. It fails really, really badly. I think these days, stuff like Mission Impossible, they adopt this formula a lot where you think that Ethan's gonna escape one way, but then it all goes pear-shaped.
Your line's not long enough! No shit!
Bond films up until this point, I can't remember using this style that much, and I think in every single other instance he gets out first try. But yeah, great way to handle it, and it then leads into him just desperately running across the alligators. As mentioned earlier, this was performed by Ross Kananga, with it taking him 6 tries to do the stunt. The outtakes for these can be seen online, and there was a ton of close calls when doing it. Kananga said that the more they tried, the more dangerous it got because the alligators were expecting it. So they were just sat there waiting ready for dinner, and at one point Ross fell into the water with them. He basically sat there for a bit on top of the middle one, which I think would have had anyone else shitting their pants. Upon trying to get to land, one also grabbed his shoe and held it in their mouth. They also tore his trousers, and I can imagine anyone else being terrified after that. However, Kananga stepped up and then delivered the take we see in the movie. It's so slick and smooth, and it's really just a great moment that's one of the best stunts in the franchise. In the end, after all the attempts, he had 193 stitches, but I feel like it was definitely worth it for this bit of cinema history.
But the fact of the matter is, bones heal, chicks dig scars, and the United States of America has the best doctor to daredevil ratio in the world.
Moore also jokingly suggested he wear crocodile shoes for the stunt, which in the end, Ross ended up donning. Dropping the chicken about the base and opening the door up, it allows the alligators and crocodiles to call shit at the lab. Bond then sets it on fire as well, and this is a great example of why they really needed someone on guard making sure Bond got killed. Yeah, don't just leave the guy in the death trap and make sure he actually gets fucking killed, mate. This then leads into Bond heading into another chase scene involving a boat on the river. I want to say bayou, is it bayou? But either way, it's an extended chase scene that's packed with lots of stunts. I love the one where the boat dashes across the land in the middle of a wedding, but overall, I think this chase just goes on a bit too long. And it's kind of like they're just adding this in because we haven't had a chase scene for 10 minutes. Bond actually doesn't fire his Walther in this film at all, and I did wonder if they wanted to scale back the shooting due to concerns around violence. So instead, they just added in as many chase scenes as possible because that's not really about firing a gun. Just a theory there, but yeah, maybe they did it as a way to soften Moore. They do punch it up by adding some police in though, including Leroy E. Hollis, who also played a policeman in Diamonds Are Forever. And in my head, they're the same character. They also have this guy, this cheery little policeman in their car.
Toby, I got me a regular Ben Hur down here.
Yep, here we have redneck cop stereotype Sergeant J.W. Pepper. Played by Clifton James, he was initially planned to be your small-minded racist sheriff that the audience would mock, because Bond basically makes a fool of him. However, they found that because people either hated him or loved the scenes that they had him in, that they had to bring him back down the line. So Pepper returns once more in The Man with the Golden Gun, even though it doesn't make much sense for him to run into Bond randomly. I feel like Clifton James did kind of get typecast because of this though, and he also plays a policeman in Superman 2, and basically does the exact same role. As a kid, I thought he was just a hilarious barrel of laughs, and then I grew up and realized he was a disgusting piece of shit, and now he's dead to me.
Dead to me!
Nah, obviously he's a very controversial character these days, and yeah, I think overall in the scene, he's also a pretty bad character in general. He's just kind of distracting, and though I like Clifton James as an actor, and I've always found him really funny in interviews, this was clearly just him hamming it up and just being a bit all over the place. He also calls all the black characters boy, which comes, obviously with its own baggage, and this has meant he's one of the franchise's most controversial figures. Now, I have seen the argument that he does call Bond the same thing, but it's something that's been talked about for such a long time, and there's always a conversation that leads out from bringing him up that kind of overshadows the movie itself because of it. However, we do get some genuine reactions from Clifton James. The jump we see here broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest speedboat jump in history. The moment where it travels over his car had it achieve a distance of 110 feet. Clifton's reaction was spontaneous and not in the script at all, but I think he sells it really well. Things actually also went wrong on the day, and the baddie's boat wasn't supposed to crash into his car. However, it was sort of a happy accident, and they thought the crash worked well, so kept it in the movie. We also have his cousin Billy Bob, who has the fastest boat on the bayou, but this gets taken away, which makes him look a bit more of an idiot. Bond then manages to get away and defeats one of Big's biggest henchmen, and then on land we get Pepper finishing off the scene. Now, though there's lots of negative things around the scene, when it comes to the stunts, I think the scene's fantastic, and there's probably a lot in this that people hadn't seen before when it came to chases with speedboats. Either way, it's a far more dramatic escape than how it is in the source material, as there the pair just make a dash from the train.
They arrive at Felix's, who's shocked to see they're still alive. Turns out their apartment was Tommy gunned to hell, and the gang then threw a grenade in to finish off the job.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
Sadly, the conductor was killed during it, and it highlights how Big's wave of terror will hurt both black and white people alike. I did even wonder if there might be a supernatural element to it, with Solitaire kind of guiding them away from danger. That then takes us to chapter 13, which is very much the calm after the storm. Bond goes to ride in Felix's car, which he absolutely loves. In his usual snobbish inner monologue, he talks about how American cars are basically oversized Beetles, where you have to play the radio too loud to just drown out how bad the engine sounds. Felix's car is a Ford though, and Bond remarks that even though it's 15 years old, it's still one of the most modern looking cars in the world. It's here they then drive down to inspect the docks. This is a giant dock area which inspired the aquarium inspection from License to Kill. Much like that scene, they're chased off the property, which then leads into Felix's terrible fate. Going down in chapter 14, that is titled, He Disagreed with Something That Ate Him. It's a rather short chapter, but Bond returns to find Solitaire's missing from their room. Turns out she got kidnapped, and Felix went looking for her, which is when Bond gets a call from the hospital later on. He comes across Felix covered head to toe in bandages, with his hand missing along with a big chunk of his leg. He's all bandaged up, and there's a note sticking out of his mouth. This simply reads, he disagreed with something that ate him. Bond then has 2 very strong cups of coffee and heads back to the harbour base. It's basically the night scene from License to Kill, where he goes to investigate the tanks. Moving amongst them, he sees lots of lidless eyes staring out at him. Killing a fish, he checks the bottom of the tank and finds coins hidden in the dirt. In License to Kill, a trader then arrives, and in the book, Bond has a shootout with a guard. Feigning a bad leg, he's like, oh, come here, mate, come here, come close, and then the guy comes over and he flicks a coin at him and smashes him like the like button. In both, the villains beg for their lives, and in both, Bond feeds them to the creature. The book then talks about how a blind rage seized him, and he thought it was a fitting fate to feed them to the shark. I'll talk more about the whole scene in general when we get to License to Kill, but in both it's clear this kill is personal. Bond then leaves the factories, hearing screams and the shark snorting like a pig as it feasts on its prey.
You want it. You keep it. Old buddy.
Now from here, the book and movie kind of go towards the same goal. Both have Bond going to Jamaica with him calling M in the book. This gives us an insight into the secret codes, including him asking the operator for the manager of Universal Exports. He relays that 3 guys have got the flu uptown and to look out for his secretary Felicia, aka Felix. Solitaire's obviously scared of Big's powers, so Bond suggests cutting a cross into his bullets. He also tells her that he wants to be with her all the time in the world, which is the first instance of it chronologically popping up in a text, I think. Chapter 16 is titled the Jamaica version, and it kind of gives us an insight into Bond's mentality. You start to die the moment you are born. The whole of life is cutting through the pack with death. So take it easy. Light a cigarette and be grateful you are still alive as you suck the smoke deep into your lungs. With the novel being around rare coin smuggling, we also start to learn about the treasure that they came from. Known as Blackbeard's lost treasure, it vanished without a trace and was long sought after by divers. No one ever found it, but one day a New York business purchased an island in the bay. Blasts and explosions were seen coming from it, which was said to create a placement for the fish tanks. Strangways was then brought in to investigate, and he sent 2 divers out to study the island. They never returned, but onlookers could hear strange drumming coming from the shore. Later, their bodies washed up on the beach, picked apart by sharks and barracuda. Strangways knew sharks didn't really feed at night, and they were only vicious if there was blood in the water. So something is off. Bond then gets some diving equipment along with the mine, and his mission's basically to go and destroy Big's boat, which is known as the Solitaire. He heads out into the water, and this takes him to the quote-unquote Valley of Shadows. Trekking across the sand under the sea, he makes a long walk through the darkness. Fleming was fascinated with sea life, and it's a pretty perilous chapter. He's attacked by an octopus at one point, and then notices a shark swimming above him. Barracudas also follow him like a silent pack of wolves, and eventually he sees the ship. Upon getting close, he pulls out the mine, which he has to strain to lower on slowly. The metallic clang could potentially alert them, and thus he places it silently against the hull. However, Bond notices the sharks and barracuda are in a frenzy and realizes someone's dropped some chum into the water. Once that's through, they'll go and turn to him, which takes us to chapter 20. That is Bloody Morgan's cave, which has him making a mad dash for the rocks. Finding an entrance to the titular locale, he notices a pool leading up from the cave. This is when he's grabbed and taken before Big. For the movie, Bond suits up in one of my favourite outfits, which is his black turtleneck and also brown holster. This is pretty iconic, and it's something Craig also rocked in the promotional material for Spectre. He never actually wears it in the movie, but it's a pretty good look. Bond then rushes in and drops some explosive charges on a timer, which is akin to what he does with the mine in the book. They then go to sacrifice Solitaire, which feels very King Kong. Things stop though as the Baron arrives out the grave. Now, I'm making this video in October, which may influence how I'm feeling here, but I really love that there's a horror tone to the movie. You often don't get that in Bond, and yeah, just seeing him rise about the grave, it was actually really nice for the time of year. The skull and face paint also feels like it gets another nod in the opening of Spectre, so I did wonder if the original plan was to tie it more in with this movie. Bond then shoots the Baron in the head and then shoots him apart, and I've always been a bit confused by this whole thing. He pops up as what appears to be an actual man, and when he gets capped, his eyes roll back.
Don't think about it.
However, he's then shot apart like a mannequin. The Baron then shows up after Bond frees Solitaire, so you think that one's a dummy. However, it looks so lifelike at points, and yeah, I just don't know, mate. Either way, Bond kicks the next one into a coffin full of snakes, which he then proceeds to shag by the looks of it, mate. The holder was completely terrified of them and didn't really want to perform this stunt. However, Princess Alexandra was visiting the set that day, and as she was royalty, he felt obligated to do. I don't know why I'd talk like that, but yeah, it's royalty, and he felt obligated to do it. Holder said he was told the snakes had all been defanged, but that it certainly didn't feel like it. Most of the set team were terrified of the reptiles, with them constantly biting the cast and handlers. So Holder was probably doing this humping motion to avoid being bitten. Bond and Solitaire then venture into the underground, which is revealed to be part of Big's smuggling operation. So it's a nice playing of the idea that the voodoo is all hocus pocus and being used to mask what's really going on. Kodo nails the way it's described in the book, with Bond remarking that Big looks bored. He says that it's taken the fly a long time to get to the spider, but now he's finally got him in his web.
Now, the book ramps up to its climax in chapter 21, titled Good Night to You Both. Bond knows he's got a slim chance of survival and that he's just buying time until the mine explodes. Finally, he's brought to Solitaire, and Mr. Big gives us the conversation that we get in the movie.
When the time came, I myself would have given you love. You knew that. You knew that!
The final thing Big wants to do is drag Bond and Solitaire across the corals and have them torn apart before the sharks descend on them. Mr. Big brags about the plan of their death, as no bodies will be found, and it'll keep the mystique of Baron Samedi alive. Going into chapter 22, titled Terror by Sea, we basically get the scene from For Your Eyes Only. Here though, they have the added element of the mine, which is due to explode just after 6 o'clock. Bond has to basically time everything perfectly. He can't be in the water too late as the mine might explode and kill them, and they can't go in too early as they'll get killed by the coral. So it's gotta be spot on. Bond shuddered to think of the mauling their bodies would suffer being dragged at any speed over the razor-sharp 10 yards of coral rocks and trees. The skin on their backs and legs would be flayed off. Once over the reef, they would be just a huge bleeding bait, and it would be only a matter of minutes before the first shark or barracuda was onto them. And Mr. Big would sit comfortably in the stern sheets, watching the bloody show, perhaps with glasses, and ticking off the seconds and minutes as the living bait got smaller and smaller, and finally the fish snapped at the blood-stained rope, until there was nothing left. Bond then decides that if the first shark fin appears behind them too early, then he'll drown Solitaire to spare her. He will then drown himself using her body as a weight, which is basically a nightmare to think about.
Nightmare, 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 nightmare. You can't do that.
However, Solitaire says, "I love you," and Bond defiantly says they will have their love. The wind seems to change, which he takes as a good omen, and catches one glimpse at Mr. Big's watch. Knowing they have 10 minutes mentally, he tries to count up the time. The pair are then stripped naked, with Solitaire saying she didn't want it to end like this. Bond says nothing, and he still continues to count. Just like for Your Eyes Only, the pair are then yanked off the pier. The book says that it feels like their arms are almost pulled out their sockets, and they're dragged through the water in a horrifying scene. 80 yards from the reef, Bond sees they're almost about to hit the coral, and he sinks to his lowest point. By his mental watch, it's now past 6, and the mine hasn't gone off. Shit. Bond then braces himself to hit the coral, and he puts himself in place to absorb the cuts. All of a sudden though, there's a massive shock that hits him in the stomach, and a sudden great flash across the sky. The rope then gives way, and the pair start treading water. It's still difficult as they're tied together, but their senses then come to. In a big stroke of luck, the reef's protecting them from the big fish, and basically giving them safety. They then look up and see bodies and heads lining the water. A mushroom cloud hangs in the sky, and triangular fins then start to feast. Arms stick up in the air before being snatched away, and screams of men can be heard in the chaos. At this point, Mr. Big arrives, and a shark bursts out the water and grabs him. The chapter ends with Bond noticing his blank, vacant and empty eyes staring at him as he gets pulled into the water.
And that's way classier than the movie, which gives him a pretty goofy death. Though I do like how Kananga plays about with the shotgun and uses it to blow up the leather couch with Whisper on it. However, he decides to give Bond an elaborate death and lower him slowly into a shark pool, possibly playing off the Felix scene from the book. Either way, Bond busts out his trusty buzzsaw Rolex and uses it to cut through the ropes. He also uses the magnet on it to grab a compression bullet, which inspired the cell escape in GoldenEye 64. Also love how Whisper tries to alert his boss, but his voice just isn't loud enough to warn him. Bond then uses the platform as a swing, and it's a great way to lock up the henchman. And yeah, don't kill him, mate. He was a nice guy, that guy. Kananga then pulls out the knife, and I've always loved Kodo's face during this. He feels so dangerous, and things heat up when the fight goes to the water. Swimming with the sharks, you really start to wonder how Bond's gonna get out of this. I even think they would have had a better ending if Kananga had been eaten by sharks, but yeah, instead we get a really goofy death scene. Like probably the worst death in the franchise. Bond stuffs the bullet in his mouth, and he then floats up like a balloon before exploding. It's just terrible, and kind of does a disservice to how good Kananga was. Bond had faced off against Blofeld for the last 3 movies, and well, all of them, except Goldfinger, if you count him being the big bad behind Spectre. He's the guy in the chair, he's the big baddie. So yeah, we kind of needed a really good villain to follow, and up until this point, I thought Kananga completely delivered. They also did an ending without resorting to the formula they'd been using since Goldfinger. Every film since then had Bond showing up with the army or a group of soldiers and there being a gigantic shootout. Things here are kept personal though, and it showed the franchise wasn't a one-trick pony, which I feel was aided by how much presence Kananga had. He was ruthless, manipulative, and also cunning due to his Mr. Big persona. But in the end, this is terrible. Yafe Kodo described this death as a joke, and in every interview about it has had complete disdain for it. It's such a shame he gets reduced to a dumb death that's basically done just to give us a punchline.
Where's Kananga?
Well, he always did have an inflated opinion of himself.
Now the book then ends with chapter 23, which is titled Passionate Leave. It's basically, you know, your usual boring Bond epilogue chapter where, yeah, Fleming basically writes about how nice of a holiday he's having. Still in Jamaica, Bond watches the birds overhead and looks at the island standing isolated and alone off in the sea. Solitaire then steps out of the house carrying a tray of cocktail stuff, saying that she hopes she's made it right, but 6-1 sounds terribly strong and it does taste like shit. It's kind of like the scene from Casino Royale with Bond in recovery. We then learn about what happened and that Quarrel came to the rescue and Bond helped carry her to the shore. Completely cut to ribbons, he ran her a bath, washed her down and then put her in some clean sheets. He then got a bath himself, still raw and bleeding from all the barracuda bites, and I don't know why I'm going into this much detail, but we're being thorough. Bond then slept on the operating table where Quarrel saved him while the CIA got to work on Big's team. They were then rounded up in America and jailed for their part in the smuggling rings. Since then, Universal Exports have claimed the treasure. M has also telegrammed to say Bond gets 2 weeks of passionate leave. Bond says, actually, does he not mean compassionate, but M knows that he's there with a girl. So yeah, it's just a nice little innuendo. Bond then sits down and thinks about the times he's looked death in the face and how it will likely happen again. For now though, Quarrel's cooked up some food that sounds amazing and the pair look towards their future together.
I still don't see why I want to travel this way. I mean, what the hell can the two of you do on the train for 16 hours?
Say goodbye to Felix, darling.
Now, because we didn't really have the big army shootout as usual, the ending gets to do something different. Like from Russia with Love, you know, the attempt from Kleb, we get a sort of fight scene between a surviving character, and it's become a trope since then that's popped up in a lot of different Bond movies. Joining Bond and Solitaire on the train playing cards, it lures you into a false sense of security, but it also has an amazing bit of James Bond trivia.
Gin.
So, Solitaire beating Bond here actually marks her as the first and one of the only people ever to beat Bond in a game of cards. Now, in the lead up to the scene, we saw some bags being boarded on and then cut literally to the other side of this. Teehee still alive and he's come back for one final fight, knocking Solitaire up into the bunk. I love how this fight takes place with Bond basically playing it down like it didn't happen once he pulls her back down. Devoid of music, it's clearly based around the one with Red Grant in Russia, and though I don't think it lives up to that, it's still a really thrilling way to close out the movie. Bond manages to outsmart Teehee by snapping the wires on his claw, and this locks him into the window. Bond then dumps him out the train and then goes back to business with Solitaire.
Just being disarming, darling.
We then close out with the Baron at the front of the train, which I think gives a really nice end card. This was put in place because there were plans to bring him back at some point down the line, but ultimately that unfortunately never materialized. I love the cut from him laughing to the skull though, and it's just a great coda to add onto the end of the movie. I know there's some people out there, you crazy bitches, who read into this and like try and figure out the logic behind it of whether the Baron's really the god of death or not, but personally I'm just like, have fun with it, it's just enjoy it for what it is. Some characters are just here to entertain us, and that's kind of what I feel with the Baron in general. Bond survived him and he also survived death, and I think this is the god of that, giving him another chance to come back. And let's be honest, that's what Moore deserved, and he brought with him a take that gave the franchise new life. The Bond films had been in flux for the last 4, with there not being a consistent run since You Only Live Twice. If we look at it from like a top-down view in the mind of a fan at the time, the last 4 Bond movies had a different actor in the role for each film. Plus you had Niven's Casino Royale as well. However, Moore really brought his own take to it and was someone who didn't really feel they were just trying to copy Connery. Though he gets lambasted, you know, for being a bit of a joke, I think this movie's also far more serious than Diamonds. People at the time, you know, were obviously saying Bond wouldn't carry into the 70s, but Moore showed that Bond could remain relevant. It grossed $161 million off a $7 million budget, which beat Diamond's box office of $116 million. That cost $7.2 million to make, so it was a major money maker for the studio. Live and Let Die also still holds the record for being the most viewed film broadcast on UK television, with it getting a whopping 23.5 million viewers for its premiere on ITV in 1980. Considering the UK population was 53 million at the time, then that's almost half the country tuning in to see The Spy on TV. This was the first Bond movie that Daniel Craig ever saw, and he would have been 12 at the time, so yeah, in my headcanon, I'm like, this is the time you watched it. But yeah, lots of acclaim around it, and I talked to Fletcher Sykes about its legacy and his thoughts on the movie. So I am joined by Fletcher from The Essence of Bond, and I kind of want to talk about the legacy of Live and Let Die. You know, it's quite a controversial movie, but it's also Roger Moore's first outing. And when they were writing this, they didn't really know who was going to be Bond, so they wrote it as generic as possible. It doesn't really feel like Moore's giving his full personality. But surprisingly, I learned this was the most watched film of all time on ITV for a movie premiere, clocking in at about half the country in the UK watched it, which is insane thinking back. So obviously it's got quite a big legacy to it, both positive and negative. But I thought, Fletcher, I'd get you on to discuss your thoughts, what you feel about the movie, and then we'll discuss some other things going forward with Moore as well.
So yeah, my earliest recollection of Live and Let Die was as a little kid watching it on ITV. I think, in fact, the most viewed Bond film that I saw growing up on TV was Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun, specifically those two. I don't really recall ever watching a Dalton or a Connery, let alone a Lazenby Bond film growing up as a kid. I mean, the 90s. But yeah, Live and Let Die, great film. It's one of those films that really sticks with you purely because it's just so different from everything else that came before it and even after. Of course, Spectre plays a little homage to it in the pre-title sequence, but the film really sort of focuses and leans in onto that sort of voodoo, black magic, juju stuff, which as a kid really sort of freaked me out. But at the same time, it was really engaging.
I think it is the only Bond movie where there's been supernatural elements, and to see the Baron constantly keep coming back through it. I do kind of wish they'd do more of the creepy stuff in Bond movies these days and kind of lean more into the horrors. Obviously, No Time to Die started with it. But yeah, it is weird how it's influenced Spectre. And what you're saying as well, it was kind of the first Bond movie that didn't have Spectre as the villain beside Goldfinger. In the book, Mr. Big is connected to Smersh, but in the movies, it had been like Dr. No up until Diamonds Are Forever, where Blofeld had been in there in some form or another, or Spectre had been mentioned at least. So it was quite an interesting turning point, and I do think that Kananga really fills sort of the vacuum left by Spectre. He's quite cool, he's very intimidating, he's very methodical, he's got those dual personalities. And his henchmen as well, I also think are some of the best in the series. Not only is Baron Samedi there, but you've also got Teehee as well. And there's lots of big stunts. What is your favourite part of the movie? Because we go from New York to Louisiana to then Jamaica. And it's quite a nice contrasting style in each act.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. Because there's so many cool and interesting moments throughout the film. You know, I love when comes to visit Bond at his home, and it's the first time we see the new Bond actor in the role. And one of the big takeaways that I was able to glean from it was that I never got the impression that Roger was intimidated by the role.
Guy Hamilton, I think, was more worried about me taking over Bond than I was.
And Roger took it very well indeed.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
He really took off with the role, and he really sort of carried the film, which would have been quite difficult for somebody, coming into the role, especially with Connery having been in the role previously for initially 5 films, left and then had to come back. So that can be quite daunting, because when somebody comes in Lazenby's case, he came in, did 1 film, and then the original actor comes back and then leaves again. That can be quite intimidating for the next actor taking on the role. And I never got the impression that Roger was intimidated. So I think he did a marvelous job in his first outing. And I suppose this is something that he carries not just throughout this film, but throughout most of his 7 films. But I really got the impression that he was just having the time of his life. And I really appreciated that, because this was a Bond who was having a great time, who was confident, cocksure.
You seem perfect. Are you proposing or something? No, nothing like that.
You just seem perfect.
Whenever I see Roger, he's the only Bond actor that I can watch and have a huge smile on my face. No matter what it is that he's doing, I'm always smiling.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. Moore kind of had quite an uphill battle because Lazenby had obviously been left the role. And I think the reputation even followed Lazenby for decades that he wasn't the bad one and he got fired. And though that wasn't the case, it still was kind of a cloud that sort of was around replacing James Bond. So Moore coming into that and knowing that the last guy had been basically not well received, I can imagine was very daunting. But he's just such a smooth and sophisticated guy that I can totally imagine him taking to it exactly like how you said. And it is a great first outing, I think. If it had have been any other actor in the role, we might not have had James Bond going on through the 70s and 80s as strong as it did, but he basically took the reins of the franchise from this point onwards and made it his own in a way that hadn't been done with Lazenby, and he just shone in the role and became James Bond for a very long time, to be honest. But yeah, we're going to be back next month, to talk about The Man with the Golden Gun. Fletcher is going to join me again to go over that and talk about a movie that wasn't necessarily as well received. But in the meantime, Fletcher, let us know what you want to shout out. I know you've got a great charity going with the GB Club. I've just joined up as well. And Fletcher, if you want to tell our listeners about it, that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, Paul, that you've signed up and joined the club. Honestly, if anybody is on the fence about it, please do join, because it's all for a good cause. It's for charity. The topic of discussion is a Roger Moore Bond film. And as we all know, Roger was a huge UNICEF ambassador, and that's our primary charity in which the club is linked to. And we've managed to raise a whole lot of money for UNICEF, and we're extremely proud of what we're doing. And UNICEF are very happy with what we're doing. So if you want to do something, it's all for the kids.
Yeah, and it's nice that you're kind of carrying on Moore's legacy as Bond fans, and yeah, just chatting about it here as well. Make sure you sign up to it, guys, as well. It is really, really worth it. I'll leave the link to that in the description. And like I said, I'm a member. I might see you at some of the events. I hope you come over and say, thank you for getting me here, and you buy me a drink as well. But yeah, thank you everyone for watching this, and we'll now go and see you next month, Fletcher, when we talk about The Man with the Golden Gun.
Absolutely.
Now, as for my thoughts on the movie, this was actually probably one of the 8 I owned on video as a kid. So it's something I constantly went back to. I always thought it was one of the dullest out of Moore's run, but over time I have grown to appreciate it. I do think everyone's still kind of finding their feet and unsure of what tone they should go with. Because of that, I don't know, it's kind of almost like Dr. No, where you can see that they're still figuring things out. And it's difficult to judge these films in a vacuum without knowing what the high points with Moore are. But I did really enjoy going back to it, and there's a lot that I like here. Moore's great right out the gate, and there's the constant feeling like it's him against everyone. We also have the gadgets, which at this point were going into being cool and flashier. Like a Rolex watch with a magnet in. It's just kind of laying the groundwork for other things to come. The villains are outstanding too, and not only do we get Mr. Big, but we've also got several of the side ones as well. Plus, there's the crocodile stunt. So it's got those really memorable moments and characters that constantly keep things going. Stuff like J.W. Pepper, it hasn't really aged that well, and he'd of course return for the sequel. When doing my ranking though, I was really going back and forth on it, and I didn't know where to drop it in with No. Though I think Dr. No is great, I think there's just a couple of elements here that tip it over the edge for me. Again, it's stuff like the henchmen, the stunts, and these minor things that when brought together just take it above that spot. Ask me again tomorrow and I might say something different, but for the moment, No's in that position and this sits just above it. Oh hey, didn't see you there. Anyway, that wraps up the video, and I'd of course love to hear your thoughts. I hope you guys are as locked in as I am, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Next time we'll be going to The Man with the Golden Gun, and then we're going to one of my favourites. So lots of things to look forward to, and members of the channel also get early access to videos. If you click the join button, you'll get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. Costs just 99 cents a month, and we've tried to set it where hopefully it's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you do it, yeah, it'll mean a lot to us. Anyway, with that out of the way, thank you for watching this. I've been your host, Paul. You've been the best. I'll see you next time. And there's a Bond breakdown on screen for you there. What do you mean you've already watched it and you're a massive fan? Go watch it again, mate. I really appreciate it. Thank you.